Okay, so today we're diving into some pretty intense stuff. We're tackling the attacks on Israel, but and you know this is going to be good. We're doing it through this translated transcript of a Spanish language video.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And let me tell you, this speaker is not holding back
Oh, really?
at all. So, like always, we're not just trying to figure out what they're saying about the attacks, but how they're saying it. Like, what does it tell us about how some people are processing all this, right?
Yeah. No, it's like we're getting a peek into a completely different conversation that's happening, like a different room where people are trying to make sense of all this stuff going on.
Yeah. And this room, it's buzzing, let me tell you. We're talking like claims that the Iron Dome has been like completely overwhelmed, that these attacks were planned way in advance, like way before.
Yeah.
The speaker even says they have, get this, inside knowledge. What do you make of that? Like, is that a common thing? To say you have inside knowledge so people believe you? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, totally. It's definitely a way to sound more credible, right? Like, you're in the know, you know what's really going on, but whether that insider knowledge is even real, well, that's a whole other story, isn't it? Like, it's really hard to know.
right. It's like, how do you know if that online review is real or if the person's just friends with the owner, right?
Exactly.
Got to be careful. Speaking of careful, there's a lot to be careful of with the way this speaker talks about, well, everything. It's terrorists this and progressives that.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They even warn about Europe being next.
Yeah.
Like, it's intense. You can feel the emotion.
Yeah, you really have to be so careful with these kinds of sources, you know? Like, have a critical ear, is that what they say?
Yeah.
Because the language is just so charged, so black and white. It's very much us versus them. And, you know, sadly, that's something we see over and over. It's like
Yeah.
someone shouting at you through a megaphone. You're going to turn your head. But that doesn't mean what they're saying is, you know, the whole truth.
No, it doesn't. And they really paint a picture, too. I mean, they even at one point compared it to 9/11.
Yeah, and those kinds of comparisons, those aren't accidents. They're meant to, like, I don't know, they're supposed to make you feel something very specific, very strong. And the thing is, you have to ask yourself, well, what is it they want me to feel? How does that then change what they want me to believe?
So they talk about Israel's response, and they really seem to think there's going to be a massive retaliation. Like, they even go as far as to say that they're going to leave Iran like a field, which is pretty intense language.
Yeah.
And they bring up that, that supposed Mossad tweet,
Oh, right.
which, again, who even knows, right?
Right.
But it seems like for the speaker, military action is like the only answer. Like, they don't even bring up diplomacy or anything like that.
Yeah, it's this very, like, this belief that force is the answer and that's it. And that's all they see.
Which is kind of scary in a way.
Yeah.
And of course, they bring up the U.S., and they seem to praise the U.S. for like already taking a hard line.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's any attempt there to kind of will that into existence, to get people to demand that involvement?
Yeah, it's possible, right? It's like they're framing the U.S. as already committed. So it's like it's a done deal. There's nothing else to even consider. And that's where, you know, as a listener, you have to step back and be like, okay, wait, is that true? Is that really what's happening? Or is this just what this person wants me to believe?
It's like they're building this whole world, this whole narrative, and anyone who doesn't agree with them is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Like, they even say at one point that if you express concern for anyone, for civilians on either side, then, well, you're on the side of terrorists.
Which is just so, like, it's just not true. It's just a completely false way to look at it. Like, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists.
This is the part that really stuck out to me. They said, you cannot be pro-peace and pro-Israel at the same time. It's like they're just shutting down any conversation before it even begins.
Right. That's exactly what that is. It's like you're either with us or against us. And if you're not with us, you're a bad guy. And it's like, come on, it's not that simple. These situations are never that simple.
It's almost like they're, I don't know, trying to scare people into agreeing with them.
Oh, for sure. And that's a big part of it, that fear. Because by presenting everything as so black and white, good guys and bad guys, it really taps into people's fear and anxiety. And that makes their message stick more, right?
Okay, so we've talked about their views, the language, this tactic of shutting down any dissent. But then they start talking about Europe, and it gets kind of weird.
It does.
That's where you can really start to see their worldview, like their own anxieties about things like the West come through and about Europe. Especially, it's all about progressives. Like, they're the root of all evil, according to this person.
Right. It's like this, like, enemy that they can just point to, and it lets them not have to look at maybe more complex reasons for things.
And this is where Europe comes in.
Yeah.
Because they seem to think that if Israel falls, Europe is next.
Right, and that's, I mean, it's classic fear-mongering, isn't it? It makes the conflict feel closer to home, scarier somehow.
Yeah.
Like they're saying, this isn't just happening over there. This is a threat to you right here, right now.
And then they go on and on about how weak Europe is militarily. Especially, I don't know why, but Germany and Spain.
Yeah.
And this weird thing about ammunition, like they're obsessed with outdated ammunition. It's
Yeah.
so strange.
Well, they're trying to paint this picture of Europe as just weak and totally unprepared, like wide open, ready to be taken over.
But why Spain? They really single Spain out.
They do.
They go off on this whole thing about Spanish soldiers stationed in Lebanon and how they're basically abandoned like sitting ducks. It's kind of disturbing, to be honest.
It is, and it's hard to say if they're trying to drum up fear and outrage or if it's like a genuine concern, but it's definitely significant.
It's like, why even mention that unless you're trying to make a larger point?
Right, and that's for us to figure out as listeners, what is that point?
Okay, so to recap, this speaker, very passionate, maybe not the most objective voice out there. They're saying some pretty out there stuff. They're using some really loaded language, and they are not fans of progressives. What's next?
Well, now it gets really interesting because they don't stop there. They start connecting these ideas to even more specific historical events, specific people even. And that's where we can really start to see their worldview.
Okay, so you're saying this is about more than just the conflict itself.
Way more. It's about how the speaker sees history, who has power, and the future of the West. And to understand all that, we're going to look at some of the other claims that they make in this video, specifically about, you ready for this? The Lebanese Christian Phalangists.
Okay, I will admit I had to look those guys up. Who are they? And why is this person even bringing them up?
Well, that's where we're going next,
Sure.
because that one little reference, it tells us so much about the speaker, about how they see history, about how they see the world today.
All right, I am hooked. Let's talk about these Lebanese Christian Phalangists. So you're saying that to understand this speaker's whole take on what's happening in Israel, we got to go to, wait for it, Lebanon.
It sounds random, but it's all connected, trust me. It's like this speaker isn't just, going on about the current situation, the attacks. They're trying to make it into this bigger story, right? And the Lebanese Christian Phalangists, they're a part of that story for them.
Okay, but for those of us who didn't exactly ace our history classes, who are these Phalangists?
Right, good point. So Lebanese Christian Phalangists, they were like this militia group back during the Lebanese Civil War, which was, oh man, it was a whole thing. 70s, 80s, tons of different groups, lots of violence. It was a mess. Alliances, betrayals, you name it.
Sounds complicated.
That's putting it mildly. But for our speaker, they see these phalangists as like this force for order, this strong group that wasn't afraid to stand up and fight against what they saw as a threat.
Which would be?
They don't really come out and say it, but you can kind of read between the lines, right? This speaker sees what happened in Lebanon back then and what's happening in Israel now. They see like parallels. Like they're saying if the Phalangists had been tougher, more decisive, maybe history would be different.
So they're basically using this really complex and really violent time in history to say, see, this is what happens when you don't just go in with full force.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's dangerous to oversimplify like that. It's like taking one little scene from a movie and being like, yep, that's the whole plot. We're good.
And I'm guessing this all goes back to their whole progressives are the problem thing.
You got it. In this speaker's mind, progressives are weak, always wanting to compromise. And that's what's wrong, you see. Like if people had just listened to groups like the Phalangists back then, if they hadn't been so worried about peace and diplomacy, well, maybe the world would be better today, at least according to this speaker.
So they're living in an alternate reality.
It's important to remember that's exactly what it is, an alternate reality, a what if, that completely ignores how complicated history really is and how much, violence can make things worse.
Right, because it's not like violence is some magic solution. It usually just causes more problems.
100%. And this is where you, as a listener, you have to be so careful. You can't just take what this speaker is saying about history, about the Phalangists as the truth. You got to look deeper, question things, look for different sides of the story.
So what you're saying is it's not as easy as this speaker wants us to think it is.
Nope. Not even close. History is messy, it's complicated. To try and make it sound like it's good guys versus bad guys, well, it's not just inaccurate, it can be dangerous, really dangerous.
Okay, so we've got the speaker clearly passionate about this, but they're also using really strong language. They're making these comparisons that, I don't know, and they seem to have this very particular view of history. What's the takeaway for our listeners? What do we do with all of this?
That's the big question, right? And it's tough. But I think more than anything, it's about awareness. If you can recognize the way they're using language, how they're appealing to your emotions, how they're kind of rewriting history, that's when you can start to look at everything with a more critical eye.
So it's like you're building your defenses against, what do they call it? Misinformation.
Yeah. And like any good defense, it's got to have layers. Don't just get your news from one place, one perspective. Look around, listen carefully, and don't be afraid to hear viewpoints that are different from your own.
That's a tough one. It's so easy to stay in our own little bubbles, with people who already agree with us.
Oh, it's so easy and it's so dangerous. Because when you only hear one side of the story, well, it's easy to start believing that's the only story. And that's when you're really open to like manipulation, propaganda even.
Right. It's like when everyone around you agrees with you, you think, oh, we must be right. But really, you're just hearing the same stuff over and over again.
Exactly. You got to get out of that comfort zone. Challenge yourself. Challenge what you think you know. And hey, it's okay to change your mind about things. In fact, that's how you know you're really thinking.
I like that. Be open to changing your mind. So we've got self-awareness. We got to get out of those echo chambers. What else can we do to be more media literate? So we don't get sucked into these one-sided stories. It's wild to think we started with this one video, one person's really strong opinion about this conflict, and we've ended up talking about like critical thinking as a life skill.
It's more important than ever, though, right?
Right.
Seriously, think about it. You're just constantly flooded with information every single day. The news, social media, even just like ads you see. And it's not like they're all trying to be objective or give you all sides of the story.
It's true. It's like everyone's trying to sell you something, whether it's a product or, like you said, a whole way of looking at the world.
Exactly. So you've got to be able to take a step back and be like, okay, why am I hearing this? What are they trying to get me to believe? And who benefits from that?
That's a lot easier said than done, though, right? Like I
Yeah.
can't fact check every single thing I see online.
You don't have to fact check everything, but you can start to train your brain to to be a little suspicious. It's like, how do you spot a fake? We got to know what to look for.
So what should we be looking for? What are the telltale signs of BS?
One of the biggest ones is language. Like how the speaker was using all these emotionally charged words and phrases.
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
What else? What kind of language should we watch out for?
Think about the stuff this speaker was saying. Terrorists, progressives, weak, strong, us versus them, that kind of thing. They're like little bombs meant to make you feel something without even realizing it.
It's not even just the words themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole, like, how it's all put together, the tone.
You got it. Pay attention to the story they're trying to tell. Is it way too simple? Are there other points of view that are just like completely missing? Are they trying to scare you or make you angry? Those are all bad signs.
So it's like, what are we, like detectives of language now?
I like that. Be a language detective. But you also, like a detective, you gotta look for more evidence. Don't just rely on one news source or one website, one social media feed. You gotta look around.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Exactly. The more you see, the more you read, the better, more balanced your view of the world is going to be.
Okay, so we've got critical thinking, we've got watching out for loaded language, diversifying where we get our information. Anything else? This is a lot.
One more thing, and this is a big one. Be kind to yourself and be kind to other people. It's easy to get overwhelmed with all of this. We all make mistakes. We all fall for things sometimes, right? The important thing is to be open to learning, to admitting when you're wrong, and to talking to people who don't see things the same way you do.
Yeah, to remember there are actual people behind the screens writing these articles, making these videos.
That's right. And like it or not, we're all in this together. We need to be able to have conversations to really listen to each other.
Well said. This deep dive has been quite the journey from one video to the whole world of information out there.
It has.
And to our listeners, remember, question everything, think for yourselves, stay curious, and until next time, keep diving deeper.